Hello, and welcome to this edition of Secure Networks, the Endace Packet Forensic Files, with your host, Michael Morris. This episode's very special guest is Tanya Janka, Head of Education and Community at Semgrep, founder of SheHacksPurple Academy, and renowned RSA speaker. Tanya, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. I am someone that was a software developer who got super fascinated by security. And then I got sort of like attracted over to the dark side. And so I started as a penetration tester, and it turned out I'm just too extrovert and social for that. There's a lot of alone time when you're a pen tester, a lot of like focus and patience. And I'm like, patience, that's terrible. So instead, I do application security, or that's what I focus on now.
Okay.
And then over the years, I started speaking at conferences and then teaching, honestly, Michael, so I could get in free and I could learn more. And then people started saying, hey, could you come and train our team, like as a job? And honestly, it didn't even occur to me. I sort of fell into becoming a trainer. And
Okay.
yeah, so now I give training and run community events for Semgrep, and it's pretty fun so far.
I love your background in terms of really trying to help educate people and getting into the cybersecurity industry. So, kind of where I want to start is how would you describe the current state of the skills gap in cybersecurity? And what are the key factors that have contributed to that gap?
Okay, so this is such a good question. I would say, so let me start with what I think is contributing to it. So academia and boot camps and even high schools aren't really teaching anything about cybersecurity mostly. And the ones that are tend to be teaching the core essentials, like you should turn on multi-factor authentication or don't click on that scary link, which is important. Um, but what we need them to be teaching. So if you're teaching people to create and program software, we
Hmm.
need you to teach them how to do secure coding. If you're teaching them to design software, in my opinion, we need to be teaching them secure design principles, threat modeling, etc. So they're designing secure systems. And so we're teaching them a little bit about quote unquote the cybers,
Hmm.
but we're not teaching them how to do the job securely that we're trying to prepare them for. And
Hmm.
so every single year we're graduating tons and tons of people who don't know how to do their new job securely. And so that just keeps compounding every year. And there's some universities and colleges that are doing some teaching, and I
Hmm.
applaud them. I'm really pleased how that is changed, because it used to be nothing,
Yeah.
and then it was just one or two, and now there's quite a bunch making an effort, but it's not a concerted, organized, comprehensive approach yet, but it's improving, so that's good. But still, way, way more people doing the wrong thing than the right thing, or not on purpose, well-meaning people. And
Right.
so that is where the problem, I think, is coming from. Just like if we had trade schools
Hmm.
releasing, people, electricians that kept accidentally setting fires to houses, that would be quite bad.
Right.
Um, and and so then the gap that I'm seeing in industry is not only that we're graduating brand new people that don't know. We've previously graduated tons of people that don't know, but also whose skills are old. So they don't know DevOps. So I learned waterfall when I went to school in the 90s. Um,
I'm there with you. I'm there with you.
and so I had to learn agile and DevOps on my own,
Right.
right? And so we have lots of people that are out in the field practicing cybersecurity that don't know the new ways that we are developing software now. And so they're trying to use old security methods on these brand new processes and tools. And it's causing friction. I like to think of someone petting a cat backwards all day long. And it's you haven't technically hurt the cat, but the cat is super ticked. The cat does not want to work with you or be near you ever. And I feel like a lot of that is happening in our industry. And so we have this skills gap, not only of like people showing up for the job who don't have the security skills to do their own job, but we have security folks who have been trained in the old ways, who haven't been updated.
Right.
And there's also, so the third thing is there's not a lot of places to go get this training.
Right.
There's and a lot of the places where we can go get it, it's not affordable. It's getting so much better now, though, which is really exciting. But so you and I were talking, so neither of us are from the United States. And so I'm from Canada, and our dollar's worth a lot less than the American dollar. But a lot of the training institutions, especially when I started, they were all American. And I remember explaining to some of my American friends, when I joined, even though I got in Canada a good salary, with our taxes and how much the exchange is, it would be around 20 to 25% of my take home for the entire year to take one sales course. And they looked at me, they're like, what? I'm like, so I really wanted to, but there's no way I could justify that.
Right.
And so as a result, you have tons of people who would love to go do these trainings, but there isn't an option. So that is a thing I've been working on the past few years, trying to bridge that gap in my own little way.
In the context of the skills shortage, what strategies or approaches do you recommend for organizations to effectively recruit and retain qualified cybersecurity professionals? I know I was just talking to people this week, lots of turnover in the industry, right? So not only recruiting, but how do you retain them?
Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. So one is this might sound a bit woo-woo and soft, but mentoring the employees you have into whatever career spot they hope to have someday, so that they continue their career with you. Like, I'd rather they get promoted off of my team but stay within my organization, so that my investment continues in them and they want to stay because they have the opportunities that they're looking for.
Right.
And so sometimes I see places where managers will block their employees from switching teams because they want to keep them because they're really good. And I'm like, oh, that's a way to just like lose them all together. And if I am going to lose them, at least I lose them to another team where I work, as opposed to our competitor or something else. And then I don't get to engage with that person at all usually anymore, right? So mentoring them, so like finding out what they want to do with their careers and helping them achieve those goals they're looking for, even if that means one day they're going to blossom out of your reach, right? Another thing is give them cool work, right? So there's a lot of work that is dull, and if we can invest the time to automate some of that work, so even like the automation of the work can be exciting work to do. But sometimes I'll see people where their work I would describe as toil, like it's repeatable and boring and manual, and oh my gosh, why would you do that? And it's like, okay, so let's make a little project to automate that. And that project could be the cool, fun work, or give them a research project or a collaboration with another team. So find out sort of what fills their cup, per se, and try to help fill that cup when you can, if possible. Or like split up the crappy work amongst the team, so it's not just one person always doing like the super dull stuff. So this is maybe just good management 101.
Right. No, there's some great tips in there. I mean, you're absolutely right, and a lot of pressure in some of these SOC organizations too, right? I mean, it's high stress in some areas.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of burnout. Like, two AppSec people that I quite frankly admire, this year decided to go out of our industry and do something else. And I was really shocked. And they're just like, I'm not getting the job opportunities I want. I'm not I feel like I'm on the edge of burnout constantly. And one of them worked in academia and he went back there, and the other one, she went back to basically software development. And she's like, yeah, then my days are normal length and I don't worry all night. And I'm sorry, but I need to put that down. And so I think that maybe the word's not worrying, but accounting for burnout within your staff, paying attention to that, like taking it quite seriously.
Right.
I feel like a lot of companies, they'll give all the work to the person that's the best on the team. And then that person's like, I can't sleep, I can't eat, I'm stressed all the time. And they're like, oh, we're so sorry. But then they keep doing it. That's a plan that doesn't work. I've come onto a lot of teams where like I look at the workload and I'm like, oh, why are you doing 70% of the work for a team of 10 people? That seems wrong. Let's look at this. And maybe they are capable of doing more, but what's like a reasonable, comfortable workload for that person where they're thriving, as opposed to like just barely not drowning. So like reassessing. And on top of that, addressing some of the workload issues with scaling. So I talk a lot about automation, but also because I work with software developers, and I know you're a network company, so I'm like a little bit on the other side of the coin. But software developers are a great way that we can scale our programs, like by doing security champions programs,
Okay.
where we help turn them into security experts so they come to us less often, or they're able to do some of the work. And there's usually about 100 developers per AppSec people, sometimes up to 500, according to GitHub, in a report they released last year, which made me like a little shivery. Um, and like, if anyone knows, it's GitHub, right? I'm like, no, I
Right.
want you to be wrong. But
Right.
anyway, so if we can help get them to even just do like 5% of what would be our work, because
Mm-hmm.
there's 100 of them, that scales really nicely. So I guess, paying attention to how stressed out your team are, and then investing in your team, like giving them training,
Yeah.
even if the training's not. So as a person who's sold training for a long time, I know it might sound like the opposite of what I should do as a salesperson, but sometimes the internal training you give's better than the consultant training.
Right.
Like, you keep having these 2 bugs over and over, so you do a deep dive into those 2 bugs.
Mm-hmm.
Or you use like you do job shadowing, where they follow you along on a security incident, or while you're reviewing static analysis results, or whatever the thing is you're doing, so that they have like more hands-on and like very specific to your organization type of training.
Mm-hmm.
I run this mentoring program every Monday on Twitter and Blue Sky and InfoSec Exchange. And so this is the last idea. So a lot of people from my industry, thank you if you're listening, if you're one of them, they'll swoop in and they'll say, hey, you're looking for a mentor? Let's have a virtual coffee. And they talk with them and they meet them and they make suggestions and they help steer them. And a lot of those people have told me they've hired the person they're mentoring eventually, like 6 months or a year or a year and a half later, that person works for them. And that loyalty and relationship tends to be very close. And that creates a lot of long-termness, long-term relationship potential. So it's an investment and it's a risk, right? Like when you
Right.
reach out to a stranger and you start mentoring them, you don't know if they'll end up being someone you can employ someday. But I've seen that strategy work well too for like recruiting someone that's just exactly what you're looking for.
Right.
And just meeting with them once every 2 weeks for a few months, and then being like, you know what, we do have that junior spot open up, and I know
Right.
exactly who is the one we need.
Right. No, those are some great suggestions. And back to your first point, some of it's management 101, but in the nature of the business we're in, it's really important to stay focused on some of those. And I can say from personal experience, I had an executive mentor younger in my career, and it was incredibly invaluable. Now, it was outside of my business unit, but it was within the company. And so even in larger companies, that works tremendously well. So, given the rapidly evolving nature of cybersecurity threats today, how do you think educational institutions and training programs can really adapt to better equipped individuals with the skills needed for the today's threats?
I feel like they need people who are practitioners to be their teachers. I see a lot of people in academia who haven't worked in private industry either
That's a good
ever
point.
or not in a very long time. And so they're like, let me show you some COBOL. I'm like, why would you show me that? Stop being developer cruelty. Stop that. And so some of the things they're teaching are so completely irrelevant. And so I do consulting and teaching at this place called IANS Research. This sounds weird, but I do 1 call a week, and I just like crunch AppSec programs for different companies. And I do it so that I can stay sharp and know what to teach,
Mhm.
because all these different companies have problems. And if a whole bunch of them ask about the same thing, then I need to write a research paper, or I need to add this to my courses, because this is something
Mhm.
teams are struggling with. And I really want to be able to know what's going on with the rest of the industry.
Mhm.
And so all the teachers at IANS are all practitioners, and they won't hire you if you don't practice. And so I feel like, even though I'm only there like 1 hour a week now, I feel like if the people in academia or the people teaching the boot camps they did consulting, and I know maybe I'm pushing it, but if they did consulting and they taught, or they take a year off sabbatical and they work somewhere and then they teach for 2 or 3 years, then they go back to industry again, they would be more on task and they'd be able to stay up to date a lot better. Because when I have these calls and they ask me, oh, well, what about this? And I'm like, I need to do a lot of research on this. How did I not know about that? Another thing is listening to podcasts like this one. Another one is subscribing to like reading the news. I cheat. So I subscribe to this newsletter called TLDR Sec, and he just summarizes almost all the good newsletters or all the news articles every week for me. So I'm cheating now. I'm just reading the summaries.
That's important though. I mean, there's so many different things going on. It's hard to stay up on everything, and these are some great suggestions. I really love it.
Oh, thank you. And that's free, and all the podcasts I'm aware of are free, so that's good.
Yeah.
And the last, which is not necessarily free, is if your organization can get a threat feed or threat intelligence of some kind. So some are free. So for instance, if you work in the Canadian government, the New Zealand government, etc., there's a CERT, a security or cyber incident response center. Most of them have a newsletter with lots of really, really valuable insights of what's up, right? Like they'll say like, oh, are you using this framework? Because right now lots of people are hacking that. If you have like this exact version, like you might want to do something about that. I find those very valuable, but there's private industry ones. In Canada, we have public safety, and they have a newsletter that's quite helpful. So signing up for those and then looking over it, like, oh, do we have that system that they're talking about? And if so, I should go check this out. And if not, just to disregard. But having like it land in your inbox, like, hey, you want to look, pay attention, please. So I try to do all of those things. And then I go on social media and I follow certain people that I find give good information. And then I also attend conferences, which everyone can't do, right? Like that's not reasonable. But thanks to COVID, there's a lot of free conferences that you can attend from home. So quite frankly, this might sound bad, but I'll sign up for one of them. And I know I can't do the whole thing, but I'll look at the agenda in advance and I'll just pick 2 or 3. And I'm like, I can miss 2 or 3 meetings today. And I'll just attend those ones, or I'll watch the recordings later of like specific speakers I follow or topics that are really interesting for me. And that's like a more affordable approach. And then just go to maybe one conference in person per year and then like soak up everything. I've one more thing that I forgot, like a plug. So the Semgrep Academy, by the time this podcast episode comes out, it will be open and it's going to be 100% free. And so we're taking all of the SheHacksPurple created courses and we're just basically putting Semgrep on them instead. And so introduction to application security, introduction to secure coding, incident response for software developers. And so I'm going to start creating lots of new free courses in there, just open to the entire public.
Great.
And so I can't believe I didn't think to mention that because that's my job.
No, that's all right. That's part of what we wanted our listeners to know resources available. So that's excellent. Thank you.
My pleasure.
We'll definitely have to put a plug for it when we post this. So we will do that. So kind of evolving a little bit. One thing I know that's important from our perspective, what role do you see diversity and inclusion playing in addressing the skills gap? And how can cybersecurity industry folks encourage more diverse workforce?
So I gave a keynote at Threat Mod Con last month, which is the first conference dedicated only to threat modeling. And in it, I talked about how diversity isn't just a checkbox. I was at a conference years earlier, and this startup founder was responding to a security incident, and he didn't understand what the problem was. And the problem that was reported was that you could, without logging in to his community platform, and I won't name the community, you could put someone's email address in, and then you could find out all the events that they'll be at in person, their physical location. Without logging in. So you aren't that person. You could put anyone's in. So you could look up your friends, But this means
Okay.
you could also look up your ex or someone that you are harassing or stalking. And he was a 6'2" giant man, right? And he's like, oh, well, why is that a problem? Like, no one bugs me. And I'm like, well, yeah, probably no one. I wouldn't bug you. And I'm like, this is why diversity matters. And he
Yeah.
said, well, we have diversity because I'm gay. And I'm like, no, diversity isn't having one person that isn't a straight white male.
Hmm.
Diversity means being able to have perspectives from all sorts of different areas of life, all
Right.
sorts of different experiences. It's not about having one type of person or having 2 or 3 types of people. It's about being able to see all the different risks
Right.
and threats that we're facing. And sometimes that means like we do need a gay person on the team, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It means we need to be able to have this set of experiences and viewpoints where we are able to see all the things that are coming
Right.
at us. And he is like, oh crap, I really got that wrong. And so we fixed his app and it ended up being fine. But well, after their incident was over. And no one got hurt, which is good. But it was scary for that
Right.
person who had concerns. And so so I think that we need to fix this gap of our industry being mostly men and our industry being mostly white and some Indian people. So thanks for representing Indian people, but we need more than just white
Mm.
people and Indian people. We need more than just men. We need more than just people who are above a certain age. We need more than just people who have had a certain type of degree,
Mm.
right? Like we need lots of different viewpoints if we're going to actually be able to see every single type of threat. So that's one thing. If we want complete coverage and a comprehensive approach, we need to have that sort of different types of brains.
Right.
But on top of that, we need it so we can fill all these jobs.
Right.
We
It's
have
the shortage. It's a big shortage. Absolutely.
You know, I read an article this week by someone who, so the articles about the shortage are all quoting the same survey, apparently run by ISC Squared, and ISC
Okay.
Squared apparently surveyed 15,000 people and asked them about the shortage, but no one has produced a data set of these millions of jobs, like these job postings that aren't open. Because I used to, with SheHacksPurple, is we would set people up who graduated with job interviews
Okay.
and introductions to recruiters, and we would have to search quite a bit for introductory jobs. And we would find tons of jobs that were very senior. Like people would write me, I want someone with 10 years of AppSec experience who has a degree in cybersecurity, who has this and this and that. And I'm like, well, I literally wrote the first book on AppSec and I don't qualify for your job. So who is good enough to qualify for your job? If I can't qualify and I wrote a book
Yeah.
about it, who do you think you're going to get? And they're like, oh. So I think some of it is job specifications that aren't realistic or fair.
Right.
Like we want 10 years experience in a thing that's existed 7 years, or we want 10 years experience and we want to pay someone that would not accept that job
Right.
or pay someone at a rate that no one would accept it. But I also think that there's not that many jobs open that we have been hearing about in these articles. I think that is potentially a gross exaggeration or an estimation and not actually based on data. Like when I read the article, it was very damning.
Right.
And so all these people that keep quoting this survey, it's a survey of people. It's not a data set showing that this is true. It's people guessing in a survey. And I'm sorry, I don't want to write an article and say it's a fact if a bunch of people guessed that that's true.
Right.
So that's a new data point for us. But I do think that there is still a skills shortage. There's not enough people who have the qualifications we want, who are willing to work for us at the price we are able to afford. And I've seen people doing AppSec getting like $300,000 a year. Like I remember being at Microsoft and this guy explaining, basically he made way more money than I did. And he's like, but I read your blog to learn how to do my job. How can I make way more than you? And I was like, well, first of all, I'm going to go ask for a raise. But second of all, I didn't think I was being terribly compensated, right? Like I didn't feel that I was not getting a good deal. So I was like, what are you doing differently than I'm doing? Besides being an American, because they do have different pay scales there, and their currency has a different value than the currency of my country. But I feel like if we continue to not have lots of people with the job experience and skills we want,
right,
then we're all fighting over those people, and then the prices go up. And instead, I'm hoping we can create more of those people. Not that we shouldn't be well compensated, but $300,000 a year. Oh my gosh, that is that as a Canadian, like, has such a fortune. Oh my gosh,
that's enormous. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And
Wow.
benefits, and like you get to go home. You don't have to live at your office. Like
What?
what?
Yeah.
So I feel like there's lots of different. Yeah, I think there's a lot of issues there, but a lot of it is around education and access to affordable education and training that is what we actually need to know to do our jobs. Okay, so that's one more thing I'm gonna comment on. So I've been meeting with Semgrep customers and talking with them about the training that we're offering, and almost 100% of them have said, hey, can you do a deep dive into this language or this framework? And I was like, no, I'm sorry, we're gonna do, because we're trying to serve like many customers. We can't create an individual training plan for each one, right? And it's a free service on top of, so you buy our product and then you get a training session with me. So it's like a bonus. So I'm like, I can't design different training for every customer because we'll never finish. But it turns out like a lot of them really want to know a deep dive into Ruby security or a deep dive into Python security. And like, I'm hoping, so I'm writing my next book right now and I'm behind, sorry, everyone. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to do not a deep dive, but a dive into the 10 most popular programming languages and frameworks. So that's 20 dives, basically, hopefully with some what you should do and what you should not do. But this is a big gap we have. Like, why doesn't this exist yet? Why am I doing this? Like, I have a lot of work to do. All of us need to pitch in. And so I'm hoping that over time, maybe there are more books. Like there's a book behind me, which is a deep dive into securing .NET, but why isn't there one for every language yet?
Right.
So hats off to the guy that wrote that. And thank you for sending me a free copy, you rock. But we need one for every major programming language. Like why is that not the default, Michael? Like when you buy a product, you get a hardening guide. Why don't we get a programming language hardening guide?
Well, to your point, it should be a chapter, and here's how to program in Python, and here's a couple chapters on making sure what you just wrote is secure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I'm hoping that this changes and it becomes a topic that everyone realizes they need to cover.
Well, as a computer science degree, I certainly, when we were going through school, because we're roughly the same range. I know that wasn't part of our education, but it definitely needs to be as we move forward. That actually kind of drives me into the next point I was wanting to get into, which is as new technologies like AI, and I learned about generative AI this week, and IoT solutions, right? Everything's on the internet, everything from refrigerators to cameras and light switches. And as these new technologies continue to evolve, how do you see the skills required in cybersecurity changing? And what steps can professionals take to stay ahead in this dynamic landscape?
I would say that, so this might sound silly, but almost every new technology, the same lessons apply. Like with generative AI, one of the lessons is don't put a ton of sensitive information into the system that you don't own. And I so fell into this trap, Michael, when I was writing my press release for, Semgrep bought my company. I was like really excited. And I was like, I'm going to use this thing to help me write some copy because I'm not good at writing marketing stuff. And so I'm like, I'll use this tool. And then I realized, oh my gosh, that's sensitive info. I'm not supposed to tell anyone yet. And I just told this AI. And so every time we adopt a new technology, we think about all the old rules of what we're supposed to do, like validate those inputs, don't put a bunch of sensitive information in, apply role-based access control, like apply least privilege. And so if we apply those same rules that we're always supposed to, we'll have way way better results, because a
Right.
lot of us make the same mistakes and we know better. And I
Right.
know better, Michael. So there's that. And then as an AppSec person, what I like to do is say like, hey, what's coming next? What are you going to work on next month? And then when they tell me like, oh, we're going to do serverless or IoT, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And then I study until the next time I see them and read about it and learn about security problems, so that the next conversation, I'm like, hey, I have some best practices I'd like you to follow. So I look like I already knew, but I didn't know.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with you prepared yourself, so there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. So, organizations, as they're managing security in especially in large scale environments, right? We were talking about some of the challenges of large scale. What are critical challenges they face, and how can they effectively balance security measures without hindering operational efficiency?
Okay, so this is a tough question. And I would say there's a few things. So one would be leveraging automation whenever
Right.
possible. So taking that time, the 2 or 3 days at the beginning that you
Mhm.
invest in order to automate things and testing them to make sure the automation is not going to cause you more problems. So doing a good job of
Right.
automation. So that's one way.
Mhm.
Another way is educating your employees to make sure that they know the best strategies. And so sometimes that means getting them a coach. Sometimes that means setting them up with a professional mentor. Sometimes that means professional training, but making sure that they have someone that's guiding them until they feel comfortable on their own doing these new things and addressing these new threats.
Mhm.
This could be even mean joining like communities, like I'm part of a community of all women that are CISOs and CEOs and like cybersecurity executives. Um, and it really helped me with my startup. And so maybe helping them find that place that they need so they find that leadership or their peers so that they can ask questions in a confidential manner. So those are some of the things. Another thing is, like I said, specifically for software development and AppSec security champions programs
Right.
are all the rage right now because it's working. Um, and then lastly, being super clear about your duties. So like delegating things that don't make sense. Sometimes security people will get their hands all up in things that they shouldn't be doing. And so I'm guilty, and this is why I'm saying this. So like I can fix bugs. That doesn't mean that it makes sense for me to be fixing the security bugs, right? Like there's developers for this. This is their job. And maybe I'm like, oh, I'll just do this one. But then meanwhile, I'm spending X number of hours per week on that, but lots of people are capable of doing that. But
Mhm.
maybe I'm the only one that's capable of leading a threat modeling session. And so as a result, we're having less threat modeling, which is equally important,
Mhm.
um, depending on your org. So
Right.
I guess making sure that you are delegating things that should be delegated. So the person who is the only one that can do a certain job is always available to do that job, which is again like a management 101 thing, but that we forget a lot when there's an incident and then there's an emergency and then there's a scary bug and we lose track sometimes.
So, taking it a step further, as many organizations are starting to shift workloads to public and private cloud environments, are there key processes, tools, telemetry organizations might be missing to ensure their visibility to secure those cloud environments?
So I have so many thoughts on this. So
Good.
I used to do lots of Azure stuff when I was at Microsoft because I was one of the Azure advocates, but I focused on security. But Microsoft made Azure Defender, which was, in my totally not a cloud security expert opinion, the first, if not one of the first, cloud security posture management tools, like a CSPM.
Mhm.
And now there's tons of CSPMs. And when I started doing infrastructure things, it was like, oh, I'm going to go and like, a remote desktop into this one box and then scan it with Nessus and then see what's happening. And like, it's so inefficient. It's so crappy as a pen tester. Like, oh, I'll just scan this one subnet and have 12 meetings about getting access to this stupid subnet. And then like I send them my results, they never fix them. And then I come back in 4 months and it's the same. It was like so inefficient and crappy, Michael. And so now instead you can hook up a CSPM. It can see everything in your cloud, tell you everything that is going on, make a prioritized list for you. Like to me, it's so magic. I was just like, okay, good. I don't have to do the boring part of my pen testing job anymore. Like, just to be clear, I love Nessus. It's a great tool. But the process of being a pen tester and having to ask for access and like only scanning like a little, I'm like, I want to scan your whole network. I'm here. Why would I just scan part of it? Like, come on, let's do this. I've got my like sleeves rolled up. Let's go. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about all the new innovation in this space. There's so many cool new tools coming out.
Right.
But one thing I'm hoping, Michael, very selfishly, as a person who has to learn all this stuff and give advice, I am hoping that some of the companies buy each other and acquire, like one acquires the other, they merge, I don't care what it's called, but where they put their tools into one big tool set so I can get all the things I need or almost all the things I need with one great big purchase instead of, oh, I'm going to have this and that and this and this, and I'm going to check my 12 dashboards. I'm hoping that there's consolidation coming forward because it's so confusing for all my clients. It's confusing for me. And I'm hoping the exact same for software security tools as well. If someone has lots of money and wants to buy Semgrep, like, let me know, but not that I'm in charge of that, but, or maybe one day we'll do the buying, right? Like, but if we can move it so we can do the whole job for you, I'd really like that so that we can make sure they have like every single thing they need and clients don't have to try to checking 12 dashboards isn't fun, Michael. Right. I think we can both agree.
No, and I know you probably don't know a ton about us, but interoperability of security tools is a key function that we really are champions about because it's important to us from our users' workflow. So I think you're spot on. Some of these things need to consolidate and need to certainly interoperate at a bare minimum. So you mentioned it a couple times with the increasing use of automation and orchestration in cybersecurity. How can organizations really strike that balance between automated processes and human oversight? Especially in some of these large, complex, secure environments?
I find that I like to start with an automated tool and scan the things, find those things, try to fix those things, try to figure out ways to prevent those things from now on. Then ideally, so let's say you're at that point where the automated tool is not really finding stuff anymore because you have fixed all the things it found and you've taught everyone not to do those things. So then that's usually where we get into threat hunting. So let's say you have a security incident or you have a bug bounty program, someone reports something to you, you have a pen test done, something like that. You look and figure out where that is, and that's a pattern. Or Semgrep calls it an anti-pattern. So it's a pattern of something we know that sucks. We don't want to see this pattern where we work or anywhere, quite frankly, but especially the organization we're trying to protect. So then once you know what that looks like, you can use tools to try to go and find that. So that's where you could threat hunt in your logs. If you write code, you could threat hunt in your code. So we make a static analysis tool, so you can use it to write custom rules and go find it. But you can do this with network stuff. So like your tools capture packets, right? And I'm sure that there are patterns for packets. I'm sure that this is a thing where you can hunt for threats. And so you go and you figure out what the pattern looks like and you search across everything and then you squash those things. You teach everyone not to do that again. And so you kind of advance your security all the time. And if possible, implement some sort of rule to block that from happening again. So you know what the pattern looks like. You know the pattern is 2 thumbs down, would not recommend to friends. And then so you do some sort of blocking situation, whether it be like with a web app firewall, a stack analysis rule when you check in your code, a firewall rule, whatever the thing is you're doing. But just getting to that level where your automated tools aren't finding a trillion things that are wrong is hard enough. And you might not fix all of them. You might say, I'm accepting the risk on this chunk of them because I don't think they create real risk. But the things that do create real risk, fixing the remediation, the hardest part of our jobs, and then prevention, and then detection. It's hard, Michael.
Well, and it ties back to what we started with too, is keeping the important people we have on the high value things versus the low value repetitive things. And so that's why I've loved this conversation, because we kind of covered two angles and really hit the importance of making it all come together. So Tanya, my last question, I always like to ask our guests, want you to be a little bit of a prognosticator here for us. What do you recommend to our listeners, really one thing to look out for or keep an eye on over the next 6 to 18 months? And I know that's an eternity in this space, but what should they pay attention to in the ever-shifting battle for cybersecurity?
I would say that, this is going to be a more specific to each person thing, but look at the mission of the organization that you work at and think about how you could reduce risk to that mission. And if you apply that in your everyday work as like a guiding goal or a North Star. So for instance, I used to work at elections, and voter suppression was a thing we were really worried about. And so when we would do projects or apps or whatever we're doing, we're like, is there something that, like voter suppression, that could be a part of the system or that is a risk here? And how can we make for sure that this is not going to happen to us? And so that was a thing that we wove through everything we did, like making sure every single Canadian that has the right to vote is able to vote. It's as easy as possible, and there's no one in their way. Like they're not being intimidated, they're not being blocked, they're not being misinformed. And so that was our mission. And so Semgrep has a different mission, like to help everyone write more secure apps. You have a mission, right? Your org, to help protect everyone's networks. I'm sure I'm saying that, I'm totally butchering it, but
that's all right.
But if you can think about what your mission is and how you can reduce risk for that mission, you're giving serious business value every day. And so your job contributes to that.
I love it. I think it's great to think everyone's role is different, and focus on how you can make a difference to the security of the organization, right? And security is everyone's job, not just the CISOs, right? So no, that's an excellent point. Tanya, thank you for taking the time and sharing your tremendous insights in how to better secure applications and networks. We'd ask our listeners to tune in next time for another edition of the Endace Packet Forensic Files. For more information about Endace's network packet capture platform and our integrations with our Fusion technology partners, please go to endace.com. But again, Tanya, thank you for taking the time. Thanks to all the stuff you've done with SheHacksPurple and Semgrep. And certainly we'll post about that when we launch this. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.